On February 9th, 1997, a 24-year-old NASCAR driver named Chris Trickle left his family's house in Las Vegas to go play tennis with a friend, and 10 minutes later, someone pulled up next to his car on a dark overpass and shot him between the eyes. He never regained consciousness long enough to tell anyone who did it or why. The bullet fragmented in his brain and stayed there for 409 days while he fought to stay alive in a coma. And when he finally died in March of 1998, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police had exactly 0 suspects, 0 witnesses, 0 physical evidence, and 0 motive. But here's the thing that makes this case absolutely wild. Even if the shooter walked into a police station today and confessed with every detail, they could never be charged with murder because of a medieval legal technicality that was on the books in Nevada at the time. The Chris Trickle case is one of NASCAR's most haunting unsolved crimes, and it's a story about a rising star who was on the verge of making it big, a random act of violence on a Sunday night, and a legal system that failed in a way that still stings almost 3 decades later. If you weren't following NASCAR's regional touring series in the mid-1990s, you need to understand what Chris Trickle represented, because this wasn't just some local short-track guy who ran a few races on weekends. Chris was the real deal, and everybody in the Southwest Tour garage knew it. He was born in Las Vegas on May 30th, 1972, to Chuck and Barbara Trickle, and racing was in the bloodline. His dad, Chuck, was an accomplished off-road racer and mechanic, and his uncle was Dick Trickle, the Wisconsin short-track legend who became the 1989 Winston Cup Rookie of the Year at 48 years old and won over 1,200 short-track features in his career. When Tom Cruise's character in Days of Thunder was named Cole Trickle, that wasn't a coincidence. The surname came straight from Dick Trickle's reputation. Chris started on motorcycles when he was 8 years old, and by the time he was 15, he had 2 track championships under his belt. At 16, in 1988, he won the World Mini Championship in the 250cc division and was track champion at Las Vegas Motocross Park. The kid could ride anything. When he turned 18, he made the jump to stock cars and immediately started stacking wins. He was the 1992 Late Models Rookie of the Year at Las Vegas Speedway Park, and then he just dominated. In 1995 alone, he won 16 races and took 24 poles in 32 late model starts. Think about that for a second. He won half his races and started on pole 3/4 of the time. The guy was on rails. In 1995, he stepped up to the NASCAR AutoZone Elite Division Southwest Series, which was the main regional touring series for the western United States, and ran 13 races. By 1996, he was running the full schedule in the number 70 Star Nursery Chevrolet for team owner Craig Keogh, and he won at Las Vegas, finished 4th in points, and even attempted 2 Craftsman Truck Series events to get a taste of the national level. His races were being shown on TNN and ESPN2 through NASCAR's Winter Heat broadcasts, so people outside the Southwest were starting to notice this kid from Vegas who could wheel a race car. 3 months before the shooting, his fellow competitors voted him the Southwest Tour's most popular driver, which tells you everything you need to know about how he was viewed in the garage. Racing is cutthroat, and drivers don't vote for guys they don't respect. The plan for 1997 was simple: move up to the Truck Series full-time and use that as a stepping stone to Winston Cup. Chris Powell, who was the president of Las Vegas Speedway, said it plainly years later. "I have no doubt Chris would have been the first NASCAR star from Las Vegas." And he would have been. Las Vegas didn't have a homegrown NASCAR star at that level in 1997. The city had the track, and it had the fans, but it didn't have the driver. Chris Trickle was supposed to be that guy. His last race was the Southwest Tour season opener in Phoenix on February 3, 1997, just 6 days before the shooting. There was a 19-year-old college kid in the stands that day watching Chris race. His name was Kurt Busch. Remember that name because it comes back later. Sunday, February 9, 1997, started like any other day. Chris and Jennifer Robinson went to dinner at Carluccio's Tivoli Gardens, which was a restaurant next to the Liberace Museum on East Tropicana Avenue. They had a nice meal, and on the way out, they congratulated a couple at a nearby table who were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Small detail, but the family remembers it. They drove back to the Trickle family's massive 15,000-square-foot home on West Torino Avenue, near Blue Diamond Road, west of Interstate 15. Chris and Jennifer lived in a custom one-room apartment attached to the main house. It was around 8:45 or 9 p.m. when they got home. Chris went inside and changed into sweats and a NASCAR Letterman-style jacket. His friend, Greg Hadges, had called him earlier, asking if he wanted to play tennis that night at the lighted courts at Sunset Park, and Chris said, "Yeah, let's do it." Jennifer decided not to go, and she fell asleep shortly after. Barbara Trickle was in the kitchen making tapioca pudding when she saw the car lights come through the front gate. One of the family dogs rushed toward the car, and Chris shooed it back. He got into his mother's white 1995 Chrysler LeBaron convertible and pulled out onto Blue Diamond Road heading eastbound toward the I-15 overpass. It was around 9 p.m. He was going to play tennis. 10 minutes later, as Chris drove over the Blue Diamond Road and I-15 overpass, which was a darkened stretch near the Silverton Casino, a car pulled alongside the convertible. Someone fired shots into the vehicle. A bullet struck Chris between the eyes. The round fragmented in his brain and lodged in his brain. The convertible spun off the road and came to rest against a road sign. Chris slumped over the wheel, unconscious but breathing. Around 9:45 p.m., an unidentified man, who was later described as a sketchy hitchhiker, came upon the wrecked convertible. He flagged down a passing Citizens Area Transit bus, and by absolute chance, that bus was carrying both a paramedic and a doctor. They started working on Chris immediately. The mystery man left the scene before Nevada Highway Patrol troopers arrived. To this day, nobody knows who he was. Chris was rushed to what appears to be University Medical Center, where neurosurgeon Dr. Lonnie Hammergren, who also served as Nevada's lieutenant governor, performed emergency brain surgery. Chris was given less than a 10% chance of surviving the first night. Later that night, homicide detectives showed up at the Trickle home and woke Jennifer Robinson. They asked who was driving the Chrysler because something terrible had happened. Chuck and Barbara Trickle got the call shortly after. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Division took the case, and what they found was devastatingly thin. The bullet had fragmented inside Chris's brain. It was initially reported as a 9mm round, though by 2008, Chuck and Barbara told reporters they were no longer sure of the caliber. Whether investigators ever extracted the fragments during Chris's life or after his death remains unclear from available sources. No shell casings were recovered at the scene. No murder weapon. And here's the absolute killer for the investigation. There were no witnesses to the crime. None. The only person who arrived at the scene was the mystery hitchhiker, and he got there after the shooting happened. The shooting took place on a darkened overpass at night, and nobody saw it. Nobody called it in. The first person who could have helped vanished before police even arrived. The only person who might have seen the shooter's face or vehicle was Chris Trickle, and he was unconscious. Investigators asked the Trickle family whether Chris had any enemies, professional rivals, personal grudges, debts, drug connections. The answer was uniformly no. The man had just won the Most Popular Driver award by a vote of his own competitors. Family friend Mike Henley told the Las Vegas Sun nobody disliked Chris Trickle, and nobody ever had anything bad to say about him, and that's unusual in racing. Racing is a small world, and people talk, but nobody had a bad word to say about this kid. After America's Most Wanted aired its first segment on the case in late April 1997, the mystery hitchhiker called the show's 800 number. He was tracked to the Los Angeles County Jail, where he was being held on a domestic violence charge. When investigators interviewed him, he said he thought he'd just stumbled on a traffic accident. He provided nothing useful and was ruled out as having any connection to the crime. A possible witness surfaced months later with a description of a car seen in the area, according to the Las Vegas Sun, but this did not lead investigators closer to a suspect. The specific vehicle description was never made public. 4 individuals falsely confessed to the crime over the following months. Chuck Trickle described them as people who just wanted to get their names in the paper. One was a man in Iowa who claimed to know where the murder weapon could be found. Another was a man in Hawthorne, Nevada, who said he'd shot Chris, but offered no supporting details. All were investigated and dismissed. No suspect was ever publicly identified. No arrest was ever made. No charges were ever filed. The investigation essentially had three theories, and none of them went anywhere. The leading police theory was that this was a thrill kill, a random act of violence, possibly a gang initiation shooting. Las Vegas in the mid-1990s had significant gang activity, and random drive-by shootings were not uncommon. The randomness of the attack matched the profile. No known motive, no preceding confrontation, a darkened overpass, a single burst of gunfire. Someone pulled alongside a car and opened fire for no reason other than they could. The absence of any personal motive supports this theory, but no gang connection was ever established. Chuck Trickle had his own working theory, and that was road rage. He speculated to the Las Vegas Weekly that somebody might have come out of the Silverton, probably lost $1,000 and was just mad. They stopped at the stoplight there, and maybe Chris hit the horn or flipped his lights or something. The Silverton Casino sat along Blue Diamond Road, near the shooting location. This theory accounts for the spontaneous, one-sided nature of the attack, but it's entirely speculative. There is no evidence Chris interacted with anyone on the road that night. The third theory was a targeted hit, and this one was investigated and effectively ruled out. Chris had no debts, no drug involvement, no business disputes, and no personal enemies. His racing rivals voted him their most popular peer. Investigators found no one in his life with a motive. The Las Vegas Weekly put it plainly: to this day, nobody who has followed the case or who knew Chris can construct a plausible scenario in which somebody would knowingly shoot one of Las Vegas's best and most popular young drivers. The balance of evidence, such as it is, points toward a random act of violence by an unknown assailant, most likely someone Chris never met and who may not have even known who he was. While the investigation was going nowhere, Chris Trickle was fighting for his life. He survived the first night against 10-to-1 odds. Dr. Hammergren's emergency surgery stabilized him. Over the following months, he underwent at least 5 to 6 major brain surgeries. He survived a life-threatening bout of pneumonia. He was transferred to Daniel Freeman Memorial Hospital in Inglewood, California, which the family remembered fondly for its outstanding staff. And then, in October or November 1997, something happened that the Trickle family still talks about. Chris briefly emerged from the coma. Chuck Trickle held a phone to his ear so Jennifer Robinson could speak to him. In a muffled but audible voice, Chris told her, "I love you." He said it twice. When they showed him photographs, he nodded at an image of Dan Marino, his favorite football player. He asked for coffee. The family dared to hope. Then, just as suddenly, he slipped back into silence. When the family's insurance ran out around Thanksgiving 1997, Chris was brought home to Las Vegas. Chuck and Barbara converted part of their home into a care facility and tended to their son themselves. In late February 1998, Chris made what would be his final public appearance at a fundraiser at the Santa Fe Hotel Casino before the Las Vegas 400 Winston Cup race. Uncle Dick Trickle attended. Around 450 people came. The event raised over $20,000. On March 25, 1998, at 3:30 p.m., Chris's lungs aspirated. He went into cardiac arrest in the emergency room at Sunrise Hospital. He was 25 years old. He had been in a coma for 409 days. Barbara Trickle had been making tapioca pudding when Chris left the house that February night in 1997. According to the Las Vegas Weekly's 2008 report, the pudding was still sitting, frozen, in the family freezer, untouched 11 years later. Now here's where this story takes a turn that makes it one of the most frustrating unsolved cases in American crime history. Nevada had a law on the books that dated back to the 1200s English common law called the year and a day rule. The rule stated that a victim must die within 1 year and 1 day of an attack for murder charges to be filed. Chris Trickle died on day 409. Even if the shooter had been caught red-handed during the investigation's early months, the legal landscape for prosecution was uncertain, and once Chris passed the 1-year mark alive, prosecution for murder became legally impossible. Chuck and Barbara Trickle channeled their grief into advocacy. They lobbied the Nevada legislature to abolish the year and a day rule. In March 1999, Governor Kenny Gwinn signed what became known as the Chris Trickle Bill, removing any time limit on murder and manslaughter prosecution. The legislation was sponsored by Dina Titus, who was then the Nevada Senate Minority Leader and later became a U.S. Representative. The law's cruel irony? It applied only prospectively, meaning it only covered murders committed after March 1999. Chris was shot in February 1997. His own case was the one it could never fix. Even if the shooter walked into a Las Vegas police station today and confessed with every detail of what happened that night, they could never be charged with murder. The legal window closed the moment Chris survived past 1 year and 1 day. The Chris Trickle bill changed the law for future victims, but it couldn't save Chris's case. The family offered a $35,000 reward for information leading to the killer. It has never been collected. America's Most Wanted aired 2 segments on the case. 4 people confessed. None were credible. By 2008, Chuck Trickle told the Las Vegas Weekly with quiet resignation, "To this day, I don't think we'll ever find him." Barbara added something that cuts even deeper. "But if they had, we would have had to go back to court so many times. It would be nice to see someone punished, but when you're dealing with a court case, it's over and over and over talking about it. You wonder how many times does your child have to die?" Barbara also offered a thought that underscores just how random this whole thing might have been. It could be that the person who did this has no idea what actually happened. The case is effectively closed. LVMPD stopped actively investigating about a decade after the shooting. As of the most recent coverage, in 2023, no investigator is actively working the case. The LVMPD cold case unit can be reached if anyone has information, but there are no known active leads. Clark County had over 1,100 cold cases dating back to 1954, and only 1.5 officers assigned to review them as of 2008. The Trickle case was one of competing for vanishingly scarce attention. The case has been covered by Autobiography Cold Cases on Motor Trend, the Enmeshed True Crime podcast, and Oxygen True Crime. None of these efforts produced new leads. After the shooting, one of Chris's doctors suggested to Chuck and Barbara that they preserve Chris's sperm. 2 close family friends later decided to use it, and on April 23, 2001, more than 3 years after Chris's death, twins Cole Trickle Mealy and Jolynn Hope Trickle Mealy were born via in vitro fertilization. In February 2017, on the 20th anniversary of the shooting, then 15-year-old Cole Trickle spoke to a local news station. "I never had a chance to meet him, and I was born 3 years after he died." He added, "I hope they know their actions really affected so many people in a way they can't imagine. I hope they know they need to come forward at some point and take responsibility for that." In 2023, U.S. Representative Dina Titus issued a statement saying, "25 years ago, I sponsored legislation in honor of Chris Trickle, a NASCAR driver and Las Vegas native who was murdered in a drive-by shooting. His killer must be brought to justice no matter how long it takes." But the hard truth is that even if the killer is identified, they can never be brought to justice for murder. The legal window closed the moment Chris survived past the 1 year and 1 day. The Chris Trickle bill changed the law for future victims, but it couldn't save Chris's case. Chuck Trickle returned to racing after his son's death and won the 2003 Super Late Model Championship at the Bull Ring at Las Vegas Motorsports Speedway. He participates in Memorial Father's Day races and signs Chuck Trickle for Chris 70. An annual Chris Trickle Classic race is held at the Bull Ring. And then there's Kurt Busch. Remember the 19-year-old college kid who was in the stands in Phoenix 6 days before the shooting, watching Chris race? After Chris was shot, team owner Craig Kehoe needed a driver for the number 70 Star Nursery car. He gave the ride to Kurt Busch. Kurt won his very first Southwest Tour race in that car. Chuck Trickle, in tears, told him, "I knew it was meant to be. Chris was with us tonight. He was in that car with Kurt." Busch went on to win the 1999 Southwest Tour Championship and the 2004 NASCAR Cup Series title. He has credited Chris Trickle as foundational to Las Vegas's emergence as a NASCAR talent pipeline. So who murdered Chris Trickle, and why was the killer never found? The answer is we don't know who did it, and we will probably never know. The killer was never found because there were no witnesses. The victim couldn't speak for 409 days, and then he died. The physical evidence was nearly non-existent. The bullet fragmented, no casings, no suspect vehicle description. There was no motive to trace. No affair, no debt, no feud, no scheme, nothing. The apparent randomness eliminated every usual investigative pathway. And even if someone had been caught, the legal technicality of the year-and-a-day rule meant prosecution was always uncertain and became impossible once Chris survived past that one-year mark. The Chris Trickle case is not a whodunit with a hidden answer waiting to be uncovered. It's something more unsettling. It's a crime that may be genuinely unsolvable. No witness, no motive, no forensics, no suspect, and now no legal mechanism for prosecution. The shooter fired into a convertible on a dark Las Vegas overpass on a Sunday night in February 1997 and vanished, possibly without even knowing they had just ended the most promising racing career Las Vegas had ever produced. The only lasting justice is a law bearing Chris's name that protects future victims' families from the same legal trap that sealed his case shut. The tapioca pudding stayed frozen in the Trickle family's freezer for at least 11 years. The case has been frozen even longer.